Welcome everyone to Beyond the Crucible, the podcast that dares to talk about setback and failure, but not so we can commiserate. It's all so that we can elevate. I'm Gary Schneeberger, the co-host of the show, and our mission today is to offer you the hope that your crucible experiences, those tragedies and challenges you faced or are facing right now, don't define you. They refine you. They did not happen to you, they happened for you. And no one I know, and trust me, I've searched my memory banks, no one I know knows that better than the founder of Beyond the Crucible, the host of this podcast, and my friend Warwick Fairfax. Warwick, we're back in the stream of doing interview episodes after our summer series, and we've got a particularly interesting guest today that I think both of us have a little bit in common with him. So that should make for an interesting conversation.
Well said. Very much looking forward to it.
That guest today, folks, is Ken Eslick. Ken Eslick is the co-founder and CEO of the Leaders Lab, an executive leadership recruiting firm, and is the host of the Leaders Lab podcast, a weekly show that delves into the world of leadership and personal development. As a Tony Robbins trainer and president founder of the Leaders Lab, Ken shares actionable advice and lessons from great leaders across all walks of life. Listeners can join Ken each week as he unpacks subjects like leadership mindset, business scaling, personal assessments, health and fitness, and money mindset. With a diverse range of expert guests, including Anthony Trucks, Tommy Rosen, Nick Bradley, Moira Kukaba, Chris Singleton, and Rob Dube, or Doobie, I'm not sure, or Rob Dube. The show offers unique perspectives and expertise on personal growth and development. Warwick, some of those names were familiar to us because we've had them on our show too. So this will indeed be a robust discussion.
Absolutely. Well, Ken, thanks so much for being on the podcast. And Ken was very kind to have me on his podcast, Leadership Lab, and very much enjoyed that. And we wanted to return the favor. And Ken has a fascinating story. And I love what you do with your podcast, Leadership Lab, as well as your business, your recruiting business. And I love the fact, which we'll get into, you've got a bunch of things that you do, but I like the fact you say relationships come first.
Yeah.
Because yes, it's out of business and recruiting people, but the relational side is critical. And I love the fact that you say it comes first. So before getting into kind of what you do with your podcast and your executive recruiting business, I'd love to hear about sort of the backstory of Ken Eslick, how you grew up, because I find often how we grew up is pretty instrumental in influencing our lives, even our crucibles, if you will. So just what was it, young Ken Eslick like? Where did you grow up? And what was life like for you growing up?
Well, thanks so much, guys, for having me on the show. And Warwick, I think you sharing your story and creating a podcast and writing a book and everything else around it helps guys like me get through our own, situations and not let them define us. But you're going to hear a lot about my background, I guess, today, because I guess when we talk about our crucibles or these kind of life-defining or can be life-defining moments, I think a lot of them are based on, our expectations, and our expectations are based on, how we were raised and, what our environment was and what we thought our identity was or our definition of success was, right? So, my parents were married young and had kids young and had, I'm sure, the struggles that young couples have when they get married when it comes to finances. And, so I'd say we grew up, certainly blue collar, maybe upper, lower class, lower middle class, something like that. It always seemed like money was a challenge. For my parents. My dad heard a snippet from one of my other podcasts, and he said, "You always had a roof over your head." And I'm like, yeah, we did, but that's not the definition of abundance necessarily, right? So to me as a kid, it's all about your perception, right? It's not about the reality really, especially when you're a kid, because you don't know all the facts. But what I saw through my lens back then was that money could somehow be a gateway out of struggle. because it seemed like my parents struggled with it a lot. And it seemed like the message that I got was, people that have money didn't have to struggle as much, So from a very young age, we grew up in this blue collar environment. Parents both worked, and dad was a truck driver and later worked his way into management. And, I just felt like I was trailing the kids I grew up with. And don't get me wrong, we weren't starving. I wasn't out on the streets. And I've heard other stories on your show where it's funny. We sometimes apologize for what
Right.
our version of lack was, because compared to someone else, I get it. But that was my world at the time, was we're struggling and you got to kind of claw. And so from a very young age, I started thinking about, and this is up in the Seattle area growing up, and I was like, well, this isn't for me. I'll find a way out, and if the way out is through monetary gain, then I'm going to do everything in my power to make money. And I did, like really young, like 8 years old. I was finding ways to make money. So, selling newspapers, picking apples, like doing whatever I needed to do to make some money. And once I got a taste of that, I only wanted more. So I would lie about my age and get actual real jobs. Like I was washing dishes in a restaurant at 13 years old, and kind of running the whole show at like 15. They thought I was 18 or 19 because I had been there for a few years. And it all kind of worked, man. Like it was, I had freedom. I didn't have to ask for things. I didn't have to bother my parents, who again were still kind of struggling with their own money issues or whatever. And all of this kind of, I'm sorry to me to rant for so long on my upbringing.
No.
Okay.
No, it's good.
So this leads into high school, and I'm buying my own car. And there's a lot of good that comes from this, right? I think we forget sometimes that when our priorities are misaligned, we don't know that at the beginning. At the beginning, they're aligned, right? At the beginning, it's like my North Star is make money. Money equals freedom and success and things like that. And so for a while it does, right? And going into my late teens, I joined the military, and I get out and I get married and I start a business, and it's all kind of working, right? We're making more money and we're getting more stuff. And then inevitably I have kind of my moment, which comes later, where it doesn't work anymore. And the money's gone. And I think when you base your whole identity around a thing, whether that's money, whether that's a title, whether that's any of it, then that can be devastating, because it's not just a loss of some paper. It's a loss of identity. And I think that's the thing I know you've talked about and written about, but that was the biggest thing for me, was when I had my sort of wake up call. And I've had it more than once, because apparently I didn't receive the message the first couple of times. So I had to hear it more than once. That's the biggest thing is watching. And then I've learned, I think, is just watching what we tie our identity to and our self-worth to, and what we don't tie it to, and I know ultimately you guys agree with me, because you're trying to talk to people about, hey, if you want to live a life of significance, what is significance for you? And ultimately, I think for anybody that I know that's had any kind of, ongoing fulfillment, it has to be tied somehow into helping others and contributing as a whole. It can't be through materialistic things or just, the gain of wealth.
Well, I mean, that is an incredible perspective. I love just, which we'll talk a bit more about the issue of identity. So when you think about parents, friends in high school, did you feel like you hear this message that, maybe we're not on the streets, but we're struggling, it's challenging, and, the rich kids, the CEOs of these companies, they sit back and they have their houses in, the Hamptons or wherever it is, and they're on easy street, and if only I could get money, somehow life would be better. Did you feel like you consciously or subconsciously heard this message around you saying, money is the path to happiness. Money is the path to less struggle, to freedom?
It was clear to me that with every fiber of my body, I believed in what you just said. I naively assumed that the wealthy didn't really have very many problems, or if they did, they were pretty trivial, because to me, this lack of finances was such a big thing that if you could conquer that, the other stuff would kind of be child's play. It would be really, really easy. And of course, we know that isn't true, but at the time, it sure felt like it.
Well, when it's something you haven't experienced, how can you possibly know it's not true?
Right.
It's
it also makes it easy because if it's something that's slightly outside of your reach, then you don't have to address any character flaws or anything else, right? It's this thing that I can't have because of the way that I grew up. So that's what's affecting my relationships. That's what, as a kid, is maybe affecting my degree of popularity or whatever it might be, right? At school, it's this external thing. It's not me, right? It's this external thing. So I think we can use those things that are outside of, I don't want to say outside of our reach, but that are to some degree outside of our control. We can use those as crutches at all stages of life, right? It's not me, it's this.
To me, the bottom line is it's so easy to think, if only I had X pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, if only I had Y, all my life it'd be great. I just need that one thing.
But if you look at it, we're talking about money because that was both of our crucibles. But when you look at it, people do it with other areas of their life, right? So if someone's lacking in a intimate relationship, they'll say, well, if I could just be with that perfect woman, perfect man, whatever, that would solve it. That's what I need, right? That's what I need, this external thing that I can't completely control, that's not making me full. And the energy that comes with that, it's kind of funny because if you're in all of these areas, I feel like, someone has probably struggled in a key area of life, whether that's a romantic relationship, whether that's spirituality, whether that's money, and when we're not lacking in one area, but we're lacking in another. So for me, it was maybe this money scarcity issue, but relationships were fine. So if I looked at somebody that was starving from a relationship standpoint, and you guys know what I'm talking about when I say starving, right? They're so clingy and looking, and it's got to, energetically, it repels it, right? But it's the same way with money or anything else. Energetically, you because of what you're saying, you haven't done the inside work to feel at ease with this stuff, that even if you get it, you're going to give it away. You're going to lose it, whether that's the relationship, the money, or anything else. So I'd like to learn that lesson a little earlier. And I think that's why I don't mind going on podcasts and stuff and talking to it, is if we could save someone 20 years of their life, that would be nice,
Absolutely. Absolutely. Very well said, Ken. So let's talk a bit about your crucibles. You've been an entrepreneur since a teenager, and you're working hard, got out of the Army. So talk about sort of the rise, if you will. You're out of the Army and you're starting to make money. So what were you doing? How did that all happen? How did the rise, if you will, financially?
Yeah, so I was going to stay in the Army more than one term. I really, really liked it. And I was actually scheduled to go back to Berlin, which had been one of my duty stations. This was right when the Berlin Wall was coming down, and we didn't know it was coming down, but everybody that had orders for Berlin got them canceled. So we, kind of suspected. And that nullified my reenlistment. So it all of a sudden went from, because if I did 2 tours, I was going to stay in 20 years. It was like, you might as well, you get, retirement and all of that. So that moment, like the Berlin Wall, really kind of defined our lives. When I say our lives, I mean my family, my wife and I were already married at the time. And it was literally just a judgment that had to be made in a matter of a couple of days. Like, hey, your orders are nullified. What do you want to do? We'll send you wherever you want to go. And it was like, I've kind of got this entrepreneurial bug. I like the Army, but I don't like the unknown of they can just ship me wherever they want. So there's some good and some bad that comes from my wife, and I just decided, okay, I'll get out. And when I did, I reached out back home, called my dad, said, do you know anybody in any of your service clubs or in our community? We live in kind of a small town that, might be selling a business. And I don't know why, but I kind of knew that I wanted to be in some kind of business services. I felt like it was like a low point of entry. You didn't need a bunch of inventory. You didn't need a building. You didn't need all this stuff. And so anyway, introduced me to a friend of his that I ended up buying out, this guy that serviced portable fire extinguishers and serviced first aid kits out of the back of a pickup truck, literally. And so I bought this guy out and bought his inventory and bought his truck, which blew a rod like 2 months into it. But nevertheless, I was off to the races, and this guy was doing it part-time. So it was kind of easy to look at and go, well, this guy was quite a bit older than me at the time, had slowed down quite a bit, wasn't really at the peak of his career, and was only working at part-time. So I looked at it and went, well, okay, I'm going to need to generate a lot more money than he is. Not that I had a big income to make up. It's just he wasn't making enough for us to live. So so it all worked. I kind of, everything I looked at with it, how much effort would it take? What would the return be? Like everything, like out of the gates, exceeded expectations, right? I was beating sales. I was beating profit numbers. One of our suppliers came in and said, hey, on the first aid side said, hey, if you get out of the fire business, we'll actually give you, we had another distributor that kind of went under and owes us money, and we'll give you their book of business if you get out of the other business. So I'm like, okay. So just kept building it, and it built pretty quick over about an 8-year time frame. And a large Fortune 500 company came in, and they were getting into our industry, and they needed young leaders. So it was kind of this perfect match where they wanted the end user and they needed a guy like me. They needed a guy in their early 30s to kind of head up operations out in that part of the country, which was NorCal at the time. And so I went from this kid, you think about this over like an 8-year period of time, this kid that, just wanted to make some money, wanted to have some weekend money, to joining the Army, to having some success there, to now these guys were going to cash me out for several $100,000 back then and clear any debt we had. And I was going to go to work for them. So it was a pretty life-changing moment. Well, had I handled the money right, it definitely would have been life-changing, because it was a stock deal, and that stock would be worth well over 10 million now. But I was young, and I hadn't settled the kind of this money mindset yet. So to me, I don't know if you guys can relate, but the money to me felt a lot like always being in a casino. Like when I was making it, it's almost like I was overly excited. And when I lost it, I was overly, damaged or depressed by it, or whatever. There was too much emotion around it, right? It wasn't just like, well, if I do the right thing especially in investing, investing to me, I was investing like I was in a Vegas casino. And that's ultimately what happened. Was I was on this streak of, my net worth going from probably a couple 100,000 to 500,000 to $1 million to a couple of million, all within, say 3 years, right? It was just like doubling every few months. And I thought I couldn't lose. I mean, I was cocky. I was arrogant about it. Not really outward arrogant to other people, but certainly out. I remember people giving me financial advice, and I'd be like, yeah, I'll let you know when I need you, Mr. Financial Advisor, making, 12% returns. I'm making 100%. Why would I listen to you, And sure enough, when the hammer fell, it fell pretty hard, right? So I went from having a couple of million in liquid assets at like 32 years old, all self-made, to I had to scramble to kind of save the house we had just built, because all of the liquidity went away. I mean, the only thing I still had was a good job, but all the liquidity went away, because not only did I have all my money out in the stock market, our money out in the stock market, but I was leveraging, because why wouldn't you leverage when you can't lose? It just seemed so smart at the time. And so we, the portfolio literally went from 2 million to nothing after tax. Cause I mean, the tax had to be paid on the money, and you couldn't claim all of the losses in the same year, and all the tax stuff that I didn't really care to look into, cause that doesn't, who cares? And, and so it just kind of wipes me out. And I got to tell you, emotionally, it was just everything in my life had put me in that place in my mind, like that I had beaten the odds, that I had done this without a college degree, that I had done it without any family money or anything like that, that I had hit all these goals, and now it was just gone completely. Like it was so, the feeling was so weird and so transactional. Thank God for my family, because I wouldn't say I had suicidal thoughts, but that's only because my brain just wouldn't let me go there. But I felt I felt depleted. I mean, emotionally and spiritually just depleted. And luckily I did have my family, and I had a good job that I could kind of build on. And I built back up over time, or we did, but I was so damaged. Like, I was so scared even to invest. I never put money in the stock market anymore at that point. I was always waiting for the shoe to fall. I mean, I went from one extreme to the other, right? I went from, bet it all on red to, oh God, don't buy anything outside a passbook account. I mean, I was almost putting money in coffee cans in the backyard. You know what I mean? Like, I was just that paranoid after all that happened. And so it's still my identity, if you can hear that. Like that
Right.
first Crucible didn't do anything to cure the problem. If you notice, I was still emotionally tied the same way. It was just now it was like my North Star is still money. When you think about it, that's why I wanted to protect it so much, right? When I say my North Star is still money, I don't mean now,
Sure.
I mean at this time, right?
Sure, yeah.
And so now I'm like, well, it didn't dawn on me that maybe I've been focusing on the wrong thing. It just dawned on me that I did it wrong, that I got it wrong, that I should still be focused on making money, my North Star. Now I should just protect it more and work even harder, right? So this continues on for a while. And I'm in the corporate world and I'm doing well and I'm rising through the ranks and I'm just kind of slowly building some wealth back up. And it's not really making me feel better necessarily, but it is making me feel a little bit more certain, I guess. And then I screw up at work. And, because during this time I developed a drinking habit that I had started, frankly, back at probably the beginning of this whole money chasing thing anyway, back when I was a teenager, but it was just rearing its ugly head. It was getting worse and worse and worse. And I unceremoniously got shown the door. I mean, the permanent records show that I resigned, but it was one of those corporate deals where it was like, we don't think this is going anywhere. How would you like it to conclude, right? And this is based on alcohol, nothing else. My results were awesome. I just screwed up one too many times. And so here I am again. Because by the way, that was an unexpected move to the door. So all of my unvested stock options and things like that went in the toilet. We had some money now. It wasn't, we weren't desolate or anything, but no source of income, no title now, no, no occupation basically at that point, or so I thought. So, and to me, by the way, Warwick, I don't know if this like rings with you guys, but whenever you have these moments, I think going back to our childhood where it's like, hey, you're not enough. You're not from that side of the tracks. You don't make that much money. And the whole time we're like fighting against it. We're like, that's bullshit. I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. I'm going to prove them wrong. I'm going to do this and that. And then when something happens, you go, all the doubts in the back of your head goes, see, like you didn't belong there, right? You didn't. And so that is literally how I felt. So I'm in my 40s. I'm unemployed. I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do next. I've got an alcohol problem that I don't want to deal with. And I've got some money, but again, I'm not checking the boxes for me anywhere in life other than maybe some of my relationships, which are important. But so that's when I actually decided to get to the bottom of all of this. It took a while. And it was through really, that's what you mentioned in the intro, that I'm a Tony Robbins trainer, Gary. And like, that was how I got involved in that stuff by unwinding my own stuff. Why am I wired this way? Why is this important? And so it started with going back to also what you were saying, Warwick, about, your self-disciple, like where does that come from? And so that's what it was to me. It's like, I'm supposed to be this leader. I'm supposed to be this guy. Like, why am I still chasing things that aren't fulfilling me? Why am I still? So I really had to get to the bottom of how I'm wired and what makes me tick. And then from there, I could build back.
So just before we get to how you bounce back, I mean, there's a lot of fascinating themes. Obviously you talked about addiction and alcohol addiction, which, sadly a lot of people go through, but it felt like there was like a money addiction.
There was.
Just the way you talk about like, I felt like good when I was making money, but then if I lost something, then I'd feel bad.
Right.
You know, it almost felt like having a drink versus now I've got the after effects of it, the ups and the downs. I'm not an expert in addiction more broadly speaking, but it feels like it was chasing money and ignoring good financial advice. I mean, it's so ironic that when you don't deal with the internal stuff, the probability of making money, I don't know if it's zero, but it's pretty close, because inevitably your damage, and I've certainly been damaged myself, will get in the way of making good decisions, of good, sound decisions.
You're hardwired
right?
to give it away. You're literally hardwired to give it back away. So I would even say things in my own mind, and maybe even out loud to a couple of people that were close to me. I'm good at making money. I'm not good at keeping it. That's just the way it is. It's almost as if the universe said, here's how we're going to wire this guy. We're going to allow this guy to make money and not keep it. And I'd almost be like, okay, that's fine. That's just my thing. And I'll just work harder. Right. That was my answer to everything.
It's almost like you're a hamster on a treadmill, and it's like, okay, I'm just going to run faster.
That's it.
I'm in this bottomless pit. So the sounds are going to come in, the grains of gold dust will come in, and I won't be able to keep it. But maybe if it comes in fast enough, I can get enough in my hand before it slips through my fingers. And
you're exactly right. And the other big motivator there, Warwick, was that, again, money motivated. So I cared a lot about external, right? I cared a lot about how it looked. So to me, it's like if the appearance of success was there, the good job, the good marriage, the good family, the nice house, even if I was pedaling, like you're saying, like on the hamster wheel to keep the thing going behind the scenes, that was okay. I was just like, I didn't love it, but I was used to that. That was my MO. Now, I didn't want to address the drinking because I just didn't want to give it up. And I knew that if I addressed it, I would have to. And so that happened a few years later. But that happened on the back of other, what I would consider very focused self-discovery. Like I was on it all the time. And eventually, you got to get to the bigger addictions. But going back to, like, somebody doesn't need to be an expert in addiction to realize that for any of us, because it can be an addiction to electronics, it can be an addiction to whatever. I have a friend that says, look, if you're engaged in behavior that no longer serves you, and yet you do it over and over again anyway, that's an addiction. Right. So that could be the food that you're eating. That can be the drink that you're having. That can be the thoughts. We get very addicted to our thoughts. We talk about these crucible moments. There's people that are addicted to their crucible moment, right? They're addicted to the pain. They're addicted to the story. They're addicted to the drama. It's almost, they don't like it, but it's almost like, who would I be without it? Because to give up that story, I got to replace it with something else. Right.
Yeah, I want to jump in because I do have the same background that you have, Ken. And we've talked about, I'm 26 years sober right now. And what you were just saying, thank you very much. What you were just saying touches on something that my sponsor in Alcoholics Anonymous told me in my first tentative stumbly steps to sobriety. And that was because I thought that what made me an alcoholic was how much I drank. Mm-hmm. And what he said to me was, no, it's not how much you drink. It's why you drank.
Yeah.
And I realized I drank to change the way I felt. If I was happy, I wanted to get happier. If I was sad, I wanted to get happy. If I was mad, I wanted to forget about it. So that kind of self-reflection, I think, applies, right? Not just to drinking, but I think for any kind of situation. I think it's easy for people to hear this conversation right now and think, Warwick had billions that he lost. Ken had millions that he lost. I can't relate to that. It's not how much you lose, right? It's how important is it to your identity what you lost, right? That's really the fulcrum on which all this turns, isn't it?
Yeah, the scale it's irrelevant to because it only matters how you feel about it, right? How it affects you in your world and what you do with that moving forward. And Yeah, because guess what? There's somebody who's lost more money than Warwick. Not too many, Warwick, but they're out there.
Yeah, if somebody could find that person, that would really be helpful. But
I mean, Twitter
anyway.
for Elon Musk, but the problem is he's still got another 150 billion sitting around, so he'll be okay probably. But yeah, and it's funny. So I mean, I think for any of us, once we start doing the inner work, the real work of going like, oh, maybe it's me, right? Maybe there's a theme here. Maybe it's not the universe. Maybe I'm not just destined to make money and then spend it all. Maybe it's not everybody else getting lucky and me getting unlucky. Maybe I have to do this stuff. And I think the more that you do it, you'll eventually address the elephants in the room if you stay with the work. To me, alcohol was probably one of the last things to go. And even when it went, it was kind of funny because Gary, you might get this too, especially if you're in recovery, but I think even for those that aren't, it's kind of funny. So I didn't want to give up alcohol because I associated with everything good.
Right.
Like, you know what I mean? So it was like, when you're done working, you get to drink and have fun and like hang out and stuff. I was generally kind of a happy drunk, even though I did it all the time. I wasn't like a depressed drunk. I was usually a energetic, happy drunk. So to me, happiness, time off, relaxation, everything good, since I was like 13, 14 years old and started drinking, everything good, like had alcohol involved, right? And if it didn't, it probably should, because it would have made it better. And so when you all of a sudden, so I'm like, okay, intellectually, I know it's got to go. So I'll give it up. And when I give it up, all the stuff that the universe has been withholding from me, right? All the riches, all the clients that I want to get in my business, that will just show up because that's the block, right? The block is that I've been drinking. I'll give up the drinking and it'll all show up. And I give up the drinking and, nothing showed up except for, I still had all the same problems and now my medicine was gone. And so I was more irritable and probably annoyed in my first couple of years of sobriety because I also didn't find a sponsor or a community or anything else. So what I did was I replaced my drinking with like self-pity, and I hung out in that state for a bit. And then finally I went like, okay, why did I drink? Where did it start? And started unraveling that stuff. And as you do it, I think if you stay with the work, and this could be the work of AA for someone that's recovering from alcohol, or just the work of being a human, right? Of what are my hangups? What are, as a person, like where am I needing to develop? I think eventually if you stay with it, it's like pulling back layers of an onion. And eventually I was able to take all that time that was spent on drinking and go, wow, it's now being used in such a productive way, right? I'm not obsessing about not drinking anymore or anything, but I spent a good couple years in early recovery just being annoyed, just being a drunk without alcohol, but I still had the same mentality.
A dry drunk, we call it.
That's it. And that was me. I mean, I was textbook dry drunk, sitting in the back of the room, pissed off. I mean, there's probably people going, just drink again already, man. You were better,
It's fascinating what you're saying about not just the alcoholism, but the attitude to money is the why matters. And obviously you guys know better than I do how that relates to alcoholism. But, for some people, when they feel bad about themselves, it might pour themselves into drink, to making money, to overeating. Sometimes there are issues with overeating that have biological issues with metabolism, but often it's, I feel bad at myself. So if I have another, cake or whatever it is, I'll feel better about myself. And for a while you do. And then, so gambling or every addiction at its root, at least it seems to me, I'm no expert on it, is the issue of why, but most people don't want to deal with the why because it's really, really painful. Yeah. It's like to deal with. So talk about that, because you've obviously had to deal with this. That had to have been painful. What did you find as you dug into the why? Why do I, Ken Eslick, do all these things that, logically don't make a whole lot of sense, whether it's alcoholism or not listening to good advice, or then getting so afraid you say, yeah, I'll invest in treasury bills or certificates of deposit, maybe not even that. Maybe I'll just stick it under the mattress. I mean, either way is not sensible. What did you find in your journey within yourself to the why? What made Ken do all those things?
I think I was so concerned with the perception of success that I didn't care about how it felt necessarily. I cared about how it looked. And I think if I could shoestring together, but of course we know, and especially, looking back at it, that wasn't a really awesome plan or anything. But I mean, I think in the moment it was, I just wanted to hold on to this idea that I had made it, that I was doing this. So if you listen to kind of what I, behind the lines of what I'm saying is, there's no vulnerability in that. You know what I mean? It's don't show weakness. Don't talk about your crucible. Don't talk about your challenges. Certainly don't talk about having a problem with alcohol, because that might mean you have to give it up in addition to looking weak, right? So to me, everything was about looking strong, and the way to look strong was to either be strong or bullshit, when you couldn't be, right? Like somehow just keep it going. And I think through the years, the why, that is a very unfulfilling why. Obviously, it's going to keep leading you down the same road. And I think that the beat down that life will give you, I think, in trying to teach you the same lesson over and over again until you finally listen. I had just received that message a lot. I mean, I think that before I gave up alcohol, I was already on the path. Alcohol was not something for me that I one day woke up and had to give up, right? That happens to some people. It's like rock bottom, right? Where you hear about rock bottom. Yeah, Gary, it sounds like you felt that.
Indeed.
But trust me, there were many moments that I could tell you, listen to this, what happened, back when I was a kid, or listen to this, what happened. And you'd be like, you didn't quit? I was like, no, you could have called many areas a rock bottom. But I guess what I'm saying is, at the time I gave it up, there was nothing spectacular about that moment other than I had just started doing the work of developing myself, right? I'll tell you what happened the night before. So I had done all this work with Tony Robbins. I had gone through all the seminars, done all the stuff. And then I was going through leadership with them, and they have a thing called Leadership Academy. I was meeting a friend of mine. We were sharing an Airbnb with a couple of other people. This is down in San Diego in 2017. And my drinking nights were becoming less and less enjoyable and a lot more regretful, even though the actions weren't really that much different. It was just like, I was so sick of it. And it was so out of integrity, basically. I always felt out of integrity. I always felt the need to apologize. I always felt the need to cover my ass. And so I wasn't really loving things anyway, but I wasn't ready to give it up. And I found some local, I went to like a VFW, Veterans of Foreign War post in San Diego, met some GIs that I'd never met before, but we all connected because it's easy to do. And we all drank a lot because that's what you do. And just got hammered and came back to the Airbnb and was passed out so hard that like I couldn't hear them trying to get in. I slept through dinner. They had never seen me like that. And the next day, you could see the look of worry on their face. And I was like, guys, I've got a drinking problem. And I don't know why I chose in that moment to just say that, because I've never said it to anyone in my life. Even people to suggest it, I would have been like, what are you talking about? I can run 10 miles right now. And I could, so I'd always defend it. But in that moment, I just said, like, I've got a problem. I'm not going to allow myself to go forward with this leadership course unless I make a commitment to you guys and myself right now that this ends today. So let me do some things to make sure that happens. And so I called my wife. I called a friend of mine that was in AA. And that was the beginning of that. But to get back to kind of the questioning is, for me, it didn't happen all at once, because it happened later in life. And it happened through, if you start doing things like meditation and yoga and self-discovery and going, so I was doing those things at the same time as drinking a lot, right? In fact, I would teach a yoga class and then go get drunk afterwards, right? It was very conflicting worlds. But I think if you continue to do the work for, whatever that is, whatever that behavior is, will eventually get rooted out.
I want to jump in and say something that you wrote to us. Can we ask all
Yeah.
guests to fill out a little form just to help us ask informed questions? And one of the questions is, what's the one bit of advice you would offer listeners to help them overcome their own crucible experiences and live a life of significance?
Mm-hmm.
What is a critical action you believe they can take to find hope and healing after a setback? And everything that you were just talking about for the last 5 to 6 minutes falls into your answer. And this is your answer to that question. Mm-hmm. You are what you continuously tell yourself you are. Right. The stories that repeat in our heads are just stories, yet our brains will treat them as fact and look for evidence of being right. That really gets to what Warwick calls soul work, right? What we've talked about, that inner work. You've got to get to that place. You've got to know what it is that's coursing through your gray matter, and then you've got to get to work on altering the story if the story needs to be altered. So I thought that was because I sensed that we're probably going to pivot here in a bit, and I wanted to make sure that listeners understood heard that incredibly good wisdom from you on how to tackle their own crucibles.
No, thank you. And it took me a long time to understand that, right? That we're not our story. And I also believe that we as individuals have a love-hate relationship with our own stories. It's almost like being in a bad marriage where, he's abusive towards me, but it's the only one I know, right? It's the only thing I know. And it's like, I think that's how our stories are. It's like, well, what am I if I'm not the guy that can make a lot of money but can't hold on to it, that runs hard every day so that I can achieve? Like, if I'm not that, then what am I? That is a difficult. In hindsight, you're like, why wouldn't you just do that? Your life's so much better now. But in the moment, I think that's a very hard reality to ask ourselves: is what am I if I'm not this? We get attached to our stories. People fall in love with the worst stories about themselves, but they fall in love with them. They generally, I help them work out of it now. And it's like people get really attached to these stories. And I was definitely attached to mine.
That kind of leads into something else that you put on that prep sheet. And I love you say, if you want to change your life, you must change your story.
Right.
So talk about, how did you bounce back? How did you change that story of who you were and how you thought and the desire for money, and that's going to make me happy, and drinking will help me forget about some of my challenges. How did you change the inner game? How did you do the inner work? How did you change your story so that you thought differently and therefore acted and lived differently?
Well, what I think is interesting is like the higher version of ourselves is always there and always available. And I don't think we have to change the story necessarily. I think we have to recognize the story gets displaced, not removed, right? It was still, that it still existed for a while. But it was just a story. It doesn't need to be told over and over again. And I think the reality is who am I really? I think those are some of the questions. If I'm not this, then who am I really? The biggest relief that I got early on from sobriety and from this self-discovery, which sobriety was part of, was the ability to be honest. Because I felt like I had been bullshitting forever, and not like outright lies, like where you're stealing from people. I'm just bullshitting about who I was, bullshitting about not having struggles, bullshitting about, and to be free of that was the one gift I got immediately from sobriety. I'm like, oh, I get to just come clean up. I can come clean and be honest. And then that starts forming from there work. So I don't know if for me, it wasn't overnight. Okay, I'm going from this to this. It was more like, well, I know what I don't want, right? I know that I'm still a leader, but I want to be authentic and I want to talk about my struggles and I want to care about something more than just the finances, but the finances were I still felt depleted at that time. Like that had to grow. I had to still continue to do work in that area. And it wasn't until, again, you figure your North Star or get caught onto your North Star being of service and substance in a real way, and let everything else fall where it may.
Part of what I'm hearing is you're rewriting your story, but you're living your life in light of the values and beliefs that are important to you.
Yeah.
You know, in terms of how you treat people, the lessons you want to help people understand about it, identity and money. And, you know, money can serve you, but you don't want it to own you or control you. And there's a difference. So just talk a bit about how that's transitioned into what you do with your podcast, Leadership Lab, and your whole executive recruiting business. So how does your values and the identity of who you are now serve you in both the podcast you have and the business you have?
Well, I think it was kind of funny because if you look at the mindset where the North Star is money, right? If the North Star is money, the North Star is money, then we already talked a lot about what that looks like personally, but professionally, it's what can I bill them for, right? Those are the kind of questions you're asking. Like, what can I bill someone for? We can have enough money this month, or we can have enough billings this month. You know, that's all you're focused on. And I think if you can get out of that mindset, then you can start focusing on things like, well, how can I just provide more value? Understanding that the universe does reciprocate, right? And that if you're dealing with the right people, they will reciprocate too. And so I don't need to count everything doesn't have to be transactional. In fact, things shouldn't feel transactional in long-term relationships, right? So what can I do to be a better client, service provider, friend, boss, whatever it is, instead of, because again, looking at it even as an employer, it's like, what is she costing me? That's what a financial scarcity mindset would be. What is this person costing me and what are they producing, right? Like that's a very like, instead of going like, hey, we hired the right person, is she developing in the time frame? Because of course you got to have benchmarks, but is he or she developing in the time frame that we thought they would? Are they exceeding expectations? That's great. If they're not, like, what can we do? But it's not also like bam, 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 like it has to happen like right now, right? So it's really helped in that degree. The podcast came from through Tony. I started doing like coaching, both group coaching, one-on-one coaching, stuff like that. And it was sort of like, you know, hey, maybe we can support what we do because we primarily recruit leaders, and maybe there's a way to give ourselves more credibility in the leadership space while still providing, again, value. So how do we do that? And that's why we had you on the show and other great people that come on. And leadership's a great framework for a podcast, I think, because we can go in a million different directions, right? We can talk about health and fitness, money, mindset, whatever we want, and we do all of that. But the podcast has kind of been the umbrella of the recruiting business, the coaching, you know, kind of all of it under one thing, which is nice.
What's fascinating to me is people write books on this, Jim Collins and Good to Great and a bunch of others, is when you serve others, and you could read 100 books on, I'm not a sales guy at all, but on sales strategy, marketing strategy, they'll all say, when you serve other people, when you care about them, when you're trying to give extra value, all things being equal, you know, you'll do well. I mean, obviously, if the economy collapses, there are certain things that you can't control, but all things being equal, if you have a service mentality, if you have a value mentality in which, look, I'm not going to try and get every nickel and dime out of the customer for every little thing. I'm going to charge fairly. I'm going to be rewarded fairly for the work I do based on, you know, market benchmarks and all the rest of it. But my mentality is, I'm just going to try and serve people. So like if you're in coaching, and I do executive coaching as well, my contract might say it's an hour, but if it goes an hour and 10, an hour and 15, an hour and 20, and I feel like in service of the client, I'm not going to go, well, I'm going to bill you an extra 10 minutes. Actually, it was 12.5. I mean, that's not a service mentality. And ultimately, they will appreciate the fact that you're not trying to nickel and dime it. You're charging fairly, but you have this service mentality. And, you know, when it's service and caring about others and, hey, I want to help you achieve your objectives, that's my focus, and getting paid fairly. Yeah, that's important. But my primary goal is I want to help you. And they believe that, they will stick with you. I always believe, and I may be an optimist or altruist in both, I believe treating people right, all things being equal, will lead to some level of business success. Not a guarantee, but put it this way, treating people poorly, that will pretty much guarantee in the long term business challenges, you know?
Of course. Look at it with your employees, you guys. Like, so would you agree that most people, I mean, unless they're dealing with something kind of heavy, but assuming no serious things going on personally, most people that you hire, that if you screen for it and you interview for it and you hire people that are like growth minded, that growth minded people in general would get better year over year, right? Would you agree with that? To whether they're going to get 2% better or 20% better. Well, imagine if all you did was hire that kind of person and never turn them over, never, or as minimal as possible, right? And your entire staff just gets better and better, month after month, year after year, quarter after quarter. How can you fail? You know what I mean? If you looked at it. So if you bring them on and go, well, I'm bringing on the right people, what can I do to create an environment that helps them help themselves, right? To continue to get better and continue to grow and continue to expand and to not leave. Because then when they leave, you got to start over again. You're back to square one. And that's the thing we've really been focused on, is to like bring on the right people, do the right thing by them. We haven't had any turnover in a year and a half in our company. And we've had nobody self-directed leave since we started the Leaders Lab in 2021. So 2.5 years ago. And that to me has been a huge part of our success, because everybody just keeps getting better, you know, and it's hard to measure it day by day. But when you look every few months, it's huge. And the customers feel it, and the customers get more value, and they'll pay more for more value. You know, it's a good combo.
That sound you just heard, listener, was the sound of the captain turning on the fasten seatbelt sign, indicating that it's about time that we have begun our descent in our Beyond the Crucible Airlines airliner to land the plane. But we're not quite there yet. Before we get there, there is a bit of business I'd be remiss if I did not do with you, Ken, and that is to say, or to ask you, how can listeners find out more about the Leader Lab and about your podcast and about all the work that you do?
Sure. So thanks for that. We're not really, I know it sounds weird because I'm jumping on other podcasts, but we're not trying to sell anything, because at the Leaders Lab, really, we're a talent acquisition firm, and we find the leaders that our clients want. So it's kind of a true headhunter thing. We don't really take applications or any of that. But if you own a company and you're listening to this and you're looking for C-suite level leadership, or if you're at a bigger company, I'd say VP level or above, then certainly reach out to us. You can email me, ken@theleaderslab.co. If you'd like to hear more, we talk about subjects very similar. There's been a great conversation. Thanks, guys, for the great questions. But we talk about stuff like this every week. So if you're interested in diving in more into that, you can check out our podcast on, you know, Apple and Spotify and all the other spots.
All right, Warwick, last question is yours, as always.
So, Ken, thanks so much for being here. One of the questions we often ask is something like this. For some listeners today, it could be their worst day. That could be in the bottom of the pit. They may feel a sense of hopelessness. It could be through addiction, money, alcohol. They may just feel bad about themselves, angry at the world, you know, whatever their spiritual construct is. What would a word of hope be? And maybe not just a word of hope, but what would be the beginnings of the first steps of a solution? You know, because often I think, you know, not to tease it out too much, but mindset's so important. So for those that might be listening that might feel a sense of hopelessness, what would a word of hope be from your perspective? Some first steps to consider to get out of the bottom of the pit.
I think, like we were talking about earlier, the first one is realizing that it's just a story and that it's not over. You know, if you think about any great movie you've ever watched or person that you've admired, they've generally come from some kind of adversity. And can this just be the catalyst that allows you to come back and go, you know what, in 2023, I thought it was over, man. Like this happened and that happened. And maybe it's just the setup for what can be a really great story for you to tell other people later. That's all it is. It's just, you know, it's things we've strung together, either true or untrue, that, you know, that we're talking about in our head. And so I think the first step is just realizing that and then maybe using it as leverage. And speaking of leverage, I'll kind of throw that in is, what are the things that are truly important to you in your life? Do you have kids or a spouse or brothers and sisters and parents and whoever else that, you just want to do better for? I mean, I think one of the steps to creating lasting change, one of the first ones, is to get leverage on yourself. When I decided to quit drinking that day, it was because I could fast forward in my mind and go, if I don't, I'm probably going to lose my wife. And if I lose my wife, I'm going to lose my relationship with my kids and eventual grandkids, right? And that was leverage, right? And leverage can be good or bad. In that sense, it was a little bit scary. I didn't want to go down that road. I knew something had to change. So again, it's just a story. Find the leverage on yourself and then seek out the resources. I mean, you're already doing that by listening to podcasts like this, but there are so many resources out there for all of us if we truly are ready to make those changes.
I have been in the communications business long enough, folks, to know when the last word on the subject's been spoken, and Ken Eslick just spoke it. So thank you, listener, for spending time with us on this episode of Beyond the Crucible. And please understand that we know, hopefully you've heard it through the stories of all of us here, Crucible experiences are hard. They don't go away quickly in most cases. They can linger many times. And it's not a one and done thing usually. It's usually an S on the end. Crucible experiences, not just one. But also know this, as we just heard from Ken's story, when those things happen, they don't have to be the end of your story. In fact, they can be the beginning of a new chapter in your story that can be the most rewarding chapter you'll ever experience, because where they lead is to a life of significance. If you enjoyed this episode, learned something from it, we invite you to engage more deeply with those of us at Beyond the Crucible. Visit our website, beyondthecrucible.com, to explore a plethora of offerings to help you transform what's been broken into breakthrough. A great place to start? Our free online assessment, which will help you pinpoint where you are on your journey beyond your crucible and to chart a course forward. See you next week.